are not required to play Dungeons & Dragons.
Wait, what?
But they're pretty freaking sweet though. And I'm gonna be giving away some free ones. So stick around to the end of the video and I'll tell you exactly how you can win them. And seriously, if you could watch this whole video through, that really helps me out. I know we tend to skip to the end, to the giveaway part.
Oh, brother.
I do the same thing, but it really helps if you watch this video. Thanks. But before we get to the giveaway, let's talk about why we're really here today. 3D printing in the world of D&D. Now, if you look at this model and you think to yourself,
oh, well, that's a single colored print that's not even painted, and you can see the layer lines, and you can see where the tree supports popped off.
Oh, wow. Wow.
well, this video is not really for you then. But if you're anything like me and you see an awesome way to give your players a really good idea of the foul beast that they're up against and the scenario they've really gotten themselves into, then welcome. We're gonna have some fun today. Now let me just start by saying that I am not trying to convince anyone that FDM printers, and don't worry if you don't understand the acronyms yet, we'll get to that. This part's really only for the people that already 3D print that are gonna be judging my opinion hard, are the go-to catch-all option for 3D printing miniatures. This video is simply about opening up the world of 3D printing to the D&D community and those that wanna add another dimension to their games without breaking the bank. My goal is to show how making your own miniatures at home is possibly easier than many people believe, and that lower cost doesn't necessarily mean poor or unsatisfactory quality. Now that we got that out of the way, what is an FDM 3D printer, and how does it differ from SLA or resin printers? Well, let's start with the kind that I'm less familiar with. SLA, or stereolithography printers, essentially use lasers to harden liquid resin into a solid plastic. This method is widely known for its ability to create highly defined, accurate 3D models because, well, lasers.
Lasers?
And if you've used miniatures or have played games where others have used miniatures bought from common online retailers such as WizKids or Hero Forge, then you've most likely gotten the chance to see how defined they can be because most of those retailers use resin 3D printers. And while printing minis of this quality might seem out of reach outside of the commercial space, these printers have actually become relatively affordable and accessible to the individual. Most hobbyists, however, lean towards the other side of the three-dimensional fence, including myself. FDM, or fused deposition modeling printers, use a spool of filament rather than a bath of resin and melt it while simultaneously laying it down to the surface below, producing a 3D model one layer at a time. This method is more widely used for larger, basic, or minimally detailed designs that don't require the extreme resolution that resin printers are capable of. There are a million examples that are easily found online of this, such as toys, trinkets, cups, bowls, and other simple projects. So with these basic descriptions, it's pretty easy to see why people believe that resin printers are the better option when it comes to 3D printing miniatures. And I get it. But this belief only rings true if your sole reason for bringing 3D printing into your games is all true definition. Otherwise, I'd say SLA printers are the clear loser. Let me explain. As I mentioned, SLA printers use a bath of resin, and it can get messy. Not only that, but the resin itself is a pretty toxic material that requires the use of gloves while handling. And while printing, it is highly recommended that you filter or exhaust the air. There are printers that have these filters built in, but they need to be replaced on a pretty regular basis. Then, following the print of your model, there's quite a bit of post-processing that has to be done, requiring you to bathe your model in alcohol to remove any uncured resin, then finish the curing process by putting it underneath of a UV light for a certain amount of time. This final step ensures a complete cure and peak strength in your model. Now, of course, the final product will be a very stunning, highly detailed piece, but how big? You see, another downside of the SLA printers is their total build volume tends to be on the smaller size, and they get quite a bit pricier as the size of the machines go up. And speaking of price, not only are the price of the machines higher, but the price of the material itself is as well. The average container size for a bottle of resin is 1 kilogram that you can buy from the store, and these typically run anywhere between $15 and $35. I'm gonna give you something to compare that to here shortly when we talk about FDM printers. On the flip side, FDM printers use, as I mentioned, what's called a spool of filament. Now, there are many different types of filament, but I'm only going to talk about the most common type in this video, and honestly the only type I've ever used, PLA or polylactic acid. Now, this material is non-toxic, and it's advertised everywhere as being biodegradable. Now, I've never done any research into that or really looked into it, so that holds no weight here. It can be handled without gloves, and there's no need for any filtration or exhaustion during printing. But there is one downside to PLA, and honestly most other filaments, just to be fully transparent, and that's that it has to stay dry.
Dry as a desert.
Most filaments will absorb the moisture out of the air, meaning that you have to keep them in some kind of airtight space. A lot of people use totes or other air drying machines. However, I have never once done any kind of special storage or dried my materials, and I've only ever had one spool that I had an issue with, and it was a silk PLA, which is essentially just a different type of PLA. And what will happen is over time, it'll start to get brittle as it absorbs that moisture out of the air. And then it has a chance of maybe messing up your machine, but more than likely, it's going to just mess up the print coming out of the machine, and it's gonna make the print very brittle. That's what happened to mine, but honestly, most of the models I made with that are still in use today. As far as post-processing goes, there's hardly any aside from the removal of what are called tree supports, which we'll get into here in a bit. But this is a necessary step not only in FDM prints, but a lot of times resin prints as well. There's no alcohol bath and there's no post-curing, which is good because honestly some of the prints might not fit in whatever UV box light you've got going on. You see, the print volume for FDM printers typically run on the larger side, typically about 8 inches cubed, which for those of you playing at home is double the diameter of the base of a gargantuan creature in D&D. And the price of the materials? Well, a standard size spool of filament is typically 2 kilograms. Correction, I don't know why I said 2 kilograms was the standard size. It's in fact 1 kilogram, and you can get larger ones in 5 kilograms. It was getting late, what can I say? And the price typically runs anywhere between $15 and $25, depending on where you're getting it, at what time of the year, because a lot of times there's a ton of sales going on this filament. The cool part about filament, though, is that there is a much larger variety in colors and styles, running from rainbow to other multicolored ones to marbled to ones that look like wood to even transparent ones like this glass purple I have here, which, by the way, we're going to be using this at the end of the video.
That's called foreshadowing.
And these special spools do tend to run a little bit more, typically up to a maximum of around $35. But what about the quality? Well, due to the nature of the FDM printing process, you're going to see what are called layer lines all the way up the print. And the reason for this is because the way FDM printing works is it has to print one layer on the bottom, what we call the bed of the printer, and it has to print that single layer, and then it has to build on top of that one layer at a time. Each layer, as it kind of squishes the filament around the outside, kind of squeezes out, and that's why you get these lines all the way up. Now, the visibility of these lines depends highly on the detail of the model you're using and the curvatures that it has. You'll also see a decrease in definition compared to the SLA printers, but that's because, well, lasers.
Laser.
But this doesn't mean that you don't get a large amount of detail. So if we take a good look at this Phoenix here, which is honestly one of my favorite prints, it really came out nice. The print looks great, but if we zoom in, you'll start to see those layer lines, most likely in the reflection of the light off the wing. You see all those little lines. Those are the layer lines that I'm talking about. Now, again, these are small, and you only really see them if you're looking for them, but they're there. All right, so I've convinced you that maybe FDM printers can be used in your game.
Okay. I'm in.
But now maybe you're thinking, I don't even know where to get started. Not a problem. Today, I'm gonna cover the basics with you so that way you can get an idea of what it takes to 3D print stuff for Dungeons and Dragons. And just to clarify, I'm not a professional and I never got into the super detailed artwork, essentially, of honing in a 3D printer and making those perfect prints. You've seen what I've been able to do, and if that's something that you think is awesome and good enough for you, then perfect, because I go the simplest route and I'm gonna teach you how to do the same thing. So I think the best way to understand what goes into 3D printing is first understanding how a 3D printer works. Now, if any of you know anything about 3D printing already, I'm sure you're looking at this machine like,
Oh, well, he has the best consumer product 3D printer on the market right now.
yes, Bamboo Labs is kind of taking the market by storm right now. This is the P1S, and their lineup is great, the P1P, the X1 Carbon, the A1, and this did cost about $1,000. But full disclosure, I've only had this machine for about 4 months. Prior to that, I had the original Ender 3 for around 5 years, and that made over half the models that I have in that cabinet currently. So I promise I put in my time.
Well, okay then.
But the beauty of all these FDM printers is that they essentially have the same parts. Starting outside the printer, you have some kind of spool holder that's going to hold your filament. Then you have some kind of extruder, which is a motor that pulls the filament into the machine. Then that filament is run typically through a tube into what is called the hot end. That hot end is what melts the plastic that can then be pushed through the final part called the nozzle. It's pushed through the nozzle, which is essentially the little hole that determines how wide the filament is as it comes out and is put onto either the bed or the previous layer. And that's essentially the main parts on any printer along the path from your spool down to the bed. But you have some other common parts you're going to find between most printers, including, as I just said, the bed itself. Every printer is going to have some kind of bed to put it on. Then, of course, you're going to have your axes. And now some printers do differ in how they work on their axes. For example, this printer, the bed moves up and down along the Z-axis, and the head, the part that everything comes out of, moves along the X and the Y axis. On my last one, the Creality Ender 3, it was what's called a bed slinger, where the bed itself moves forward and back along the Y-axis, and the head, or the nozzle, is what goes up and down, and it also moves along the X-axis. And that's of course all the main pieces, but there are going to be different things between different printers, such as the LCD screens that they have. Some have cameras and some don't. Some have auto bed leveling, which we'll talk about here shortly as far as what that means. And some of them have enclosures, like mine does, and some don't. Okay, so now you've got the general idea of how FDM 3D printers work, but what does that even mean? Where do you find 3D models, and what do you do with them when you get them, and how do you tell the 3D printer to make the model? Don't worry about it, it sounds a lot harder than it is. We're gonna take a look at it now. Okay, so first we'll start with the fun part, which is finding whatever model it is that you want to make. Now, there are two primary sources I use to find my 3D models. One of them being for generic models for pretty much anything and everything, the other being specifically for D&D miniatures. So let's start with the basic one that gives us anything and everything you can think of, which is called Thingiverse.com. Here you can see that there are a load of things that people put up for you to be able to make on whatever 3D printer it is that you have. So let's just go right here to the Perry the Platypus that we see. This person has modeled this Perry the Platypus, and they are offering it up to anybody to be able to use. The models on here are free, but you can always tip the designer, which I think is great. A lot of people put a lot of hard work into this stuff, so I think it's a great idea to do so. If we scroll down, you can see here, Files, and this is where you'll find the exact file that you need. Now, there are a couple different 3D files that you can use. The one that I look for the most, because it's so versatile, is the STL, which stands for stereolithograph. All you do is you simply download it. Once you download it, then you'll be able to open it in whatever slicer program you have, which, don't worry, we are going to explain what a slicer program is, and then from there you'll be able to print the model. Now, for D&D specific content regarding miniatures, I use what's called the Mini Index. Here you can type in any kind of monster that you want to look for, and it will search through the multitude of 3D model websites to look for whatever design it is that you want. So let's start with a simple one, a beholder. This is going to return a whole bunch of models that people have made. Now, this is not just free models, this is also models that you can buy, but we can go up here to this little checkbox and mark off free minis only and hit apply changes. And now you'll see that you have so many free models to pick from that you can download and print yourself. Anyone that has ever printed any miniatures most likely knows this name right here, MZ4250. He is one of the most notable people creating miniatures for tabletop role-playing games. You will find him on all the websites. His models are amazing, and almost every single one of my models was based off of his design, or his design exactly. So let's pull up this one right here. You can see here it says view on Shapeways. This person tends to post their models on Shapeways, though a lot of them are also posted on Thingiverse. Once you're on here, you can create a free account, which I have already done. Then you simply scroll to the bottom and you download a product. And you can open this up in your slicer program. I know. What is a slicer program? Well, simply put, the slicer program is what takes the model you just downloaded, the STL, and it turns it into what's called a G-code, which is a file that your printer can read, and it tells that nozzle exactly where to be in space to 3D print this model. Additionally, inside that slicer program, you'll be able to change some things about the model before you create the G-code file, such as maybe you want to scale it up or down and make it bigger or smaller, or maybe you want to add something to it by downloading another file and combining them together. That's all a little bit more than what we're going to be looking at today. Simply put, we're just going to be learning how to put it in the slicer program and then export it as the file that your printer needs to read. Now, regarding the slicer, the one that I use, as you can see here, is OrcaSlicer. This is just a preference. You can download any of the other slicers, Cura, Prusa Slicer, Bambu Lab Studio. They're all going to have the same general features. This is just the one I prefer because I've been using it for so long. No matter which slicer you choose, you can expect to be able to select your printer at the beginning to have all the available presets for that printer. This is a great starting point, and as you can see here, I have all the basic Bambu Labs P1S settings as shown in the upper left corner, and I've been using them since I got it. Here you can see we have the beholder that we downloaded right in the middle. Whenever you pull one of these files up, all of the slicers do the same thing. They're going to load it up on the build plate right in the center of it. And I know it can be a little daunting looking at all the settings to the left. We aren't going to go through all of them. We're just going to go through the basics. And the first thing we're going to go through here is the strength tab. The infill, and as you can kind of read there, is the internal density of your model. How full of plastic is it going to be? The default in OrcaSlicer is 15%, and I know that sounds low, but that is plenty strong enough, especially for what you're using it for, being just a miniature. It's not going to need to hold any weight, it's not going to take any force, you're just going to be moving it around, so 15% is more than enough. I, however, do tend to adjust this to 100% because I like a nice, thick, dense, heavy model. So I changed it to 100% for no reason other than to just have the weight. And that's all we're really going to touch here in the strength tab. So the next one we'll go to is the support tab. Now you heard me mention tree supports earlier, and this is where we're going to be able to set those up so that way your model is supported in areas that it's not by other parts of the model. And I know that sounds confusing, but don't worry, I'm going to show you what it looks like and you'll be able to see what I'm talking about. So the first step is to enable supports. So now here you can see type. There are generally two types. We have normal supports, which are just vertical, straight up and down supports that are really good for basic models that don't have a lot of curves or parts that are hidden from the base plate. Tree supports, however, are really good for complex models that have a lot of caverns and other spots that are hard to reach straight up and down from the build plate, such as miniatures. So I always use tree supports. Now, style is going to change between different slicers. It's going to have different names for them, and they're going to have different adjustments. But in OrcaSlicer, I always just go to organic. However, that doesn't really matter. All of them are going to work. Organic just seems to work the best and have the least issues, and it uses the least amount of material. Any of those styles will work, and I'm sure that's the same for any of the other slicers. And that's the last setting I'm going to touch here for supports. I'm just going to turn those on and have them do their thing. You can see there it says auto. It's going to automatically detect where supports are needed. Then we'll head down here to raft. Raft is not something that I use on every print, and honestly not even many prints, but we are going to actually use it in this print. If we go look at the beholder and we look underneath, because it's kind of a spherical shape, the creature itself is, not much is touching the build plate. So we want to make sure we have something there holding up this model that is touching the build plate in a large surface area, so that way there's a good chance it's going to stick and it's going to stay where it's supposed to. So we can turn on a raft, which essentially builds this piece underneath the model to lift it up and hold it in place. Now I set it to 3 layers. That's not necessary, but that seems to be the right amount for me every time. That has worked pretty consistent, so that's just what I go with. Now we'll go to the final tab that we're going to talk about, which over here is Others, and you'll see right underneath is the section for skirt loops. I like to set 2 loops, and what these are just rings that go around your model right on the plate that have nothing to do with the model. And these are useful for right in the beginning, finding out whether or not your model is going to be successful or not. As your printer makes these rings, you'll be able to see a few different things, including whether or not your bed is level. So if some of the parts are sticking for the rings and some are not, you'll know that your bed's not level and you should stop it before it gets too far. Additionally, you'll be able to see if you're having good bed adhesion, because if the rings aren't sticking at all, then there might be something you need to do to your bed, like clean it more. And you'll be able to see if your flow is good coming out of the nozzle. If it looks like you're getting little spurts of filament, or if sometimes it's coming out and sometimes it isn't, then you might have something clogging the nozzle, and it's better to stop the print now and get that fixed rather than find out later when you've wasted so much filament. So I always turn skirt loops on just for that extra security. Then a few sections down, you see brim here. This is the other option that's typically used instead of raft. A brim, rather than lift the piece up, is just going to build more on the outside of whatever part of your model is touching the plate. You'll be able to pull these off at the end and it's not too hard, so these are nice to use on models that are touching enough, but maybe you want a little bit more of a secure adhesion to the bed. And that's all we're going to mess with. That's the basics that I use every time, and you can slightly adjust those. And of course, you can dive into this and learn about all the other settings and play with them and figure out what they do if this is a hobby you really want to get into. But I just want to show you the general settings that I use all the time to get my minis up and printing. So we'll go over here to Slice Plate and be able to get a good look at what this is going to do on my printer. All right, so now you can see a whole bunch of colors, and they're all a different part of the model that we had in the settings. Green is your supports, which also includes your rafts. Red and orange are your model, and purple is the infill. Now, before we get any further, I am noticing here that I forgot to do one thing. At the bottom of the stand here, you can see it's creating a raft. We only needed a raft for the beholder itself, because the stand is wide enough with enough surface area to adhere to the bed without any issue. So we want to turn that off, and I'm going to show you how to do that. If we go back to prepare, we can change here from global to objects. Now you can see the two different parts of our project here. The first one is the stand itself. Now, as soon as I click that, you can see our settings open up underneath, and I can go down and remove those raft layers. Now that I've done that, we can hit Slice Plate, and you'll see that the raft is gone here, but it's remained underneath of our beholder. So now let's take a look at the raft and the supports themselves. At the bottom, the raft has created a nice big surface area and has lifted the beholder up 3 layers, and that's going to give us a good stick and make sure that it prints perfectly. The supports are here, and you can see they're holding up the different arms and tentacles and supporting inside of this hole here, all to make sure that it doesn't sag and the arms don't fall over and pieces don't print incorrectly. And if you're wondering why it's only showing part of the print, that's because I've messed with this bar over on the right here. I can lift this up or down to see the different layers of the project and see what I have printing where and things that maybe I want to adjust. The purple is the infill, and if you remember correctly, I had set it to 100%. So it's showing that it is completely filling this model with plastic, and it's going to be nice and heavy. But let me show you what it looks like with just 15%. So I'll go back to prepare, go down to global, so now we're editing everything again. We're on the strength tab here, and we'll go down and change this to 15%. Now we'll go back and Slice Plate again, and you can see here all the space that now exists within your model. This is going to use a lot less plastic, and it's going to take a lot less time to print, and the only cost is honestly a little bit of weight. The strength is going to be perfectly fine for what you need, so nothing to worry about there. Once you've got the model how you like it, then you can just go up to Print Plate, and once you click that, if you have a machine that can accept the models wirelessly, you'll be able to send it right to it, or you may have to just download it to an SD card and insert the SD card right into your machine. Such was the case with my Ender 3. Now, regarding bed leveling, that is something that is very common with every printer. You have to make sure that your bed is perfectly level with the movement of the nozzle. Otherwise, as the nozzle goes around and tries to lay filament on the bed, it's going to be higher in some areas and lower in the others, and some places it will stick and some places it won't. Once it doesn't adhere to the bed, that is the end of the print. It's going to start printing on nothing, and you're just going to get what's called a bird's nest of material, or even worse, you get a giant clog where it clumps up all this material up inside the machine, and then you have to fix it and change pieces out. So that is an issue with FDM printers, but so long as you make sure your bed is level, it's not something you really have to worry about too often. So I know we just went through all of this on this beholder here, but I actually already have a beholder, and I want to show you guys the process of the print itself. So instead of making another one of these, I'm actually going to use that glass purple that I showed you earlier and make an amethyst gem dragon. Okay, so in many cases, big projects like this, you actually print in parts, and usually you'll download those parts straight from the website. They will give you all the parts that you need, and you print them separately. Because this printer has a bit bigger of a bed, I'm actually going to print it all at once. And so you can see here all the material it's going to take. It is going to take 293 grams of material. So realistically, I would only be able to make like 3 of those with this roll if I wanted to do that. And it's going to take 11 hours and 40 minutes to print. But that's okay, because I'm just going to let it do all the work while I go to sleep. And then when I wake up, hopefully it's getting at least close to done. Okay, so I sent the print over and it is currently downloading, but while we wait for it to download, I am going to do something I always do for a print, and I'm going to spray it down with some alcohol, which I will then wipe with a lint-free cloth. This is going to remove any of the grease left over from any of the previous prints and hopefully give us a nice clean surface and increase our odds and make sure that this print stays on the bed and doesn't pop off halfway through and waste all that time in filament. Okay, so now that this is doing its first layer, we are going to take a good look at it. You'll notice here that these do look good. I see some parts that have lifted up, but these are just the supports, so they're not super imperative in making sure that they are perfectly stuck. I am a little concerned at the first line here. This is just a purge line to make sure that it gets out any impurities in that first part of the filament. I'm a little concerned it lifted up because that might mean that it's not perfectly level here, but the rest of it does look okay. So we're just going to keep an eye on it because this is the most important part of the entire print. If your first layer fails, everything else will fail, but as long as your first layer does okay, everything else should hopefully, fingers crossed, be okay as well. So I'll keep an eye on it for the first layer, and then we'll see what happens afterwards. Okay, things are looking good, so I'm going to go to sleep. We're going to let it run for the night, and then we'll check it out tomorrow. Next day, this thing is finished. Woo, let's get this thing out of here. Okay, so if you're totally new to the world of 3D printing, this might look a little odd because it's got all these tree supports that we put on. A lot of times these will just pop right off, but because these are thin wings and some of it's attached to the base here, we want to take our time and really separate these carefully. That way it doesn't break any parts of the dragon. So come with me, we're gonna go do that now. And if you are going to get a 3D printer, I highly recommend getting yourself at least these. These are the cutters that a lot of 3D printers come with. They're very tiny and they're good at getting in tiny spaces and cutting these pieces off. But I find that I tend to actually use these pliers more often than not because I tend to pull things off more than cut them off. It's a little bit more dangerous as far as maybe breaking a piece of whatever it is you printed, but as long as you're careful enough, I tend to prefer it. Okay, and there you have it. Our dragon is finished. All the supports have been removed, but there is one more step in the cleanup process I want to show you just to make this look a little bit nicer. So I'm going to zoom in for you here. If you look really closely to the wing, you'll see what's called stringing. And this is when the plastic is very hot and the head moves to another part of the dragon and kind of drags some of the plastic with it, and then that dries and becomes almost like this little spider webby material. This is very easy to get rid of. You just take any kind of lighter, could be a regular lighter, a butane torch lighter, and you just hold it over it for a split second and it melts that plastic away and it was never even there. And there you have it. This is an ancient amethyst dragon that I've now 3D printed and I have on hand whenever I want to throw it at my players. It is not perfect, don't get me wrong. It's obviously not as nice as the ones you can buy online that are pre-painted. They're resin, so they're very defined. But this is definitely something that when you throw it out on the table in front of your players, they're gonna get that immersive emotion, that fear, the excitement that you want, and it's at a much lower cost. Speaking of cost, let's go through a quick breakdown of everything it costs to make this dragon. All right, so to begin the breakdown, let's first talk about the most important part of 3D printing, the printer itself. Now mine's a bad example of a beginner printer, but I'll still talk about it because it's the one that I used. I used the Bamboo Labs P1S with the AMS. The AMS is the automatic material system that sits on top of the printer and essentially just switches between filament for me rather than me manually loading it. My setup cost almost exactly $1,040, but you don't need that AMS. You could get it without it, and that runs about $700. The best thing about this printer is that it was essentially plug and play when it was delivered. I didn't have to do much as far as putting it together. I didn't really have to do anything as far as calibration because it does that automatically. It does the automatic bed leveling, and then of course with the filament changer, it switches between those automatically. So there's a lot of really cool stuff that comes with this, but it is not something I would recommend as a beginner. I would also probably not recommend the last one that I had, being the original Ender 3, because they've made a lot of really cool changes and upgraded them, and the price isn't that much different. But I'll talk about my last one just in case. I had the original Ender 3, and right now that is going for $170. It's a very basic setup When you get it, you do have to put it together. There are videos that make that very easy to do. And once it's put together, you do a little bit of tuning to it, it's a great printer and it's gonna do what you want. You're gonna get some cool models out of it and it'll be fun to play with. What I would actually recommend as a beginner printer is one that my neighbor got that I've been able to toy around with called the Ender V3 SE. This is an upgraded version of the Ender 3, and it fixes quite a few things that the original one didn't have, being so basic, but the two primary ones that stuck out to me, especially for beginners, is the automatic bed leveling and the automatic filament loading. As far as bed leveling goes, it is one of the most obnoxious things to do, especially as a beginner printer, because if you don't get it perfect and that first layer doesn't stick, you've wasted your time. Your print's not going to stay and it's not going to finish, and it'll just be very frustrating to work with. That automatic system doing the leveling for you is such a weight off your shoulders as you just let it do its thing and you're ready to go. The automatic filament loading is not imperative. It wasn't that bad with the original Ender 3. You kind of had to hold a lever in while it heated up and then you push the filament in yourself. This new system is pretty nice because you just stick the filament in the hole and it automatically pulls it in and sets everything up for you. This Ender 3 V3 SE right now is running about $200 to $220, so $30 to $50 more. And in my opinion, with the upgrades that it came with, the money is worth it. So now that we've got the printer out of the way, let's talk about what you want to download on your computer called the Slicer, as we mentioned before. These are free. You don't have to pay for these. Every big name brand has their own and they all work great. You've got Cura, Prusa Slicer, the one that I used called Orca Slicer, and they all kind of feed off of each other, so they all do the same thing and they are all free. You don't have to worry about paying for that. Additionally, so many models that you want to find are free as well. As I mentioned before, I get all the models that I use as miniatures from a creator called MZ4250. He puts them out there for anyone to use, but he does have a Patreon, which I highly recommend going on and supporting because that helps him and it gives him the ability to continue to make these amazing models. I want to throw a big shout out to him and I hope everyone can go support him because I love using his models. But there's plenty of other creators out there that have made models that you can use, and there are also ones that you can purchase, which again, I would definitely support because these creators do put a lot of time into modeling them, but if money's what you're worried about, it is not necessary to purchase models. You can find them for free. But what we do have to consider is the consumable here, the filament. I use inland filament from Micro Center primarily because I pass one on the way home from work, so I can pick one up whenever I need one and not have to wait the day or two for shipping. But that's not necessary. You can definitely find other brands online and order it right to your door. These basic spools and even the glass purple that I used for this dragon are currently selling for about $19, so we'll just round up to 20 for the sake of calculation. This is a pretty average, reasonable price. You can definitely get them for cheaper when they go on sale quite a few times throughout the year, or find other brands online that are going to run you anywhere between $13 and $16. But again, I do this for the ease of access. Now this dragon, if you remember, was 300 milligrams of material. So if we calculate that out, it was about 30% of the spool, so about $6. And that's about it. That's all that goes into this dragon. Now, of course, you could try to calculate in the electricity used for the machine. I don't really know what that would cost. I don't think it's much, but I'm sure there's plenty of YouTube videos out there that could go over that with you. A thing to keep in mind too, I did print this at 100% infill, which as I mentioned before is totally not necessary. You can do it at about 15%, and when I looked at that, it was about 225 grams. So closer to $4 to $4.50 in material rather than $6. This is also a large monster. A lot of the monsters I print are medium-sized to large-sized creatures, and these can range anywhere from 10 grams to 50 grams, which is at this point below $1 in materials, which is way cheaper than the miniatures you can buy at the store. Granted, the quality is less and they're not painted, but if that's not what you're worried about and you're only worried about cost, this is a great route to go. And then of course there's some other things to consider, like tools that you don't necessarily need but you might want. Like I said before, most printers come with a set of these flush cutters, but if you wanted to buy the 2-pack that I got here, I got them from Home Depot and they're currently running $17. And then there's some other things like the alcohol. You can buy regular 70% isopropyl alcohol right from the store for a few dollars. You can buy the lighters that I had for a couple dollars as well. So a lot of it's small stuff that you don't necessarily need, but maybe you want to have just on hand. But other than that, there's not much to it. You need the printer, you need the filament, and that's about it. All right, there you go. That's pretty much all the basics you need to know about 3D printing in the world of D&D. Of course, there's so much to this hobby that if you really decided to deep dive into it, you may get stuck because there's ways to hone these prints in, to really smooth them out and make them look nice. minimize the amount of waste that you have, and so many other options. And I also only covered miniatures specifically, but there are so many other TTRPG tools and fun little trinkets that you can print for your games, such as dice trays and dice towers and even spell counters. So hopefully I've been able to at least enlighten you a little bit to decide whether or not this is something you might be interested in. And of course, if you have any questions, you can always reach out. You can put a comment down below, you can message me directly. I don't mind either way. I love helping people, and I look forward to any questions that you might have. And now to move on to the part that I know you watched this entire video for, the giveaway. At the time of recording this, I have 41 subscribers, and my goal is to have 100 subscribers in the next week or two. And the way I'm really hoping to jolt that forward is by having a giveaway on the day that I hit 100. This giveaway is going to consist of me selecting 5 random subscribers, so that's all you need to do is subscribe to my channel, and each of those winners is going to be sent for free one large-size 3D printed creature by me of that winner's choice, such as this beholder or this fire elemental or even this roper. And additionally, I'm gonna send what I call these dice bullets. I will send you one dice bullet, the color of your choice. And this just holds one full set of polyhedral dice. And you can see mine's a little squishy here. I tend not to use the percentile dice, so I take that out and I replace it with a piece of foam so I get that little effect, and you can kind of roll it around. And you can just see the back of it just twists off, and then you can push them right out, which I'm not going to do, they're going to go everywhere. But you push them right out and you're good to go. So each winner is going to get one monster and one dice bullet, and I'm going to send it to you for free. And if you've made it this far, you get to be one of the special few that hears about my giveaway I'm going to be doing over on my Patreon at MoreDND at the exact same time. On my Patreon, you can be either a free or a paid member, and on the day that I hit 100 subscribers on YouTube, I'm going to do a giveaway for all of my patrons, free or paid, and I'm going to only be selecting one to give something away to, because on that one, I'm going to let the winner there get a dice bullet, but choose between either a huge creature of their choice, such as this storm giant or this froghemoth, or one ancient dragon of their choice. So for instance, this ancient green dragon. So the winner there is going to get a dice bullet, they're going to get one of those, and I'm going to send that to them for free. Free members are going to get one entry into the giveaway. Paid members are going to get 3. So head on over to my Patreon, become a free member, become a paid member. Either one's great. I do have a lot of content available to both. And definitely make sure you subscribe down below on YouTube, because neither of these giveaways happen until I hit 100 subscribers here. Thank you so much for watching my videos, especially if you're a repeat watcher. I love you guys, and I can't wait to see you in my next one.